The acrid smell of burning metal and synthetic fuel hung in the air like a poisonous fog. Nara's lungs strained with each breath. The atmosphere on this ravaged planet still thick with particles from the battle that had raged just hours ago. Around her, the landscape was a testament to destruction. Twisted metal from spacecraft wreckage jutted from the ground like skeletal fingers, buildings reduced to rubble, and black smoke billowing into an already darkened sky. She shifted slightly, the movement sending sharp pain through her side where her armor had been shattered by blaster fire. Once a gleaming symbol of her status as a royal guard of the Velan Empire, the armor now hung in fragments, barely protecting her pale blue skin underneath. Dust and ash coated her face, but her eyes, large, almond-shaped with vertical pupils, still burned with the pride that had made her one of the Empire's most formidable warriors. Or, at least, she had been until yesterday. Now she knelt in the ashes of what had once been a forward outpost, hands bound tightly behind her back with plascuffs that cut into her wrists. Her captors, human soldiers, had left her here while they secured the perimeter, but Nara harbored no illusions about her fate. Betrayers of the Velan Empire were not afforded mercy, and humans had never shown clemency to her kind in the decade-long war that had consumed both their civilizations. Death was coming. She had made peace with at the moment she refused the Emperor's command to execute unarmed prisoners. The crunch of boots on debris alerted her to someone's approach. Nara straightened her back, refusing to meet her end cowering. If these humans wanted to execute a Velan warrior, they would look into her defiant eyes as they did so. Through the settling dust emerged a human soldier, a man whose battle armor was as battered as her own. He walked with a slight limp, and a half-healed wound marked a shoulder where the protective plating had been torn away. His face, partly obscured by grime and a day's growth of beard, was difficult to read, but his eyes, a shade of green that reminded Nara of the forests on her home planet, were alert and watchful. He stopped a few paces away, seemingly assessing her. Nara maintained her defiant gaze. This was the moment, she thought. The human would raise his weapon, possibly say something cruel or self-righteous, and end her life. Instead, he reached to his side and unhooked a water container. "You're wounded," he said simply, crouching down before her. His voice carried no malice, only a matter-of-fact observation. "Drink." Nara stared at him, uncomprehending. "Humans never spare us," she said, her voice rough from smoke and thirst. "Why delay the inevitable?" The man's expression didn't change. He unscrewed the container and held it closer. "I'm not here to kill you." "Then you are a fool," she spat, though her parched throat betrayed her with a rasp. Without responding to her barb, the man moved behind her. Nara tensed, expecting a knife across her throat, a merciful end, at least. But instead, she felt the pressure on her wrists ease as he cut through the restraints. "My name is Tomas," he said, returning to face her and offering the water again. "And I don't fight for either side anymore. Not after what I've seen." Hesitantly, Nara took the container with hands that had begun to tremble slightly from exhaustion and dehydration. She sniffed the water suspiciously before taking a careful sip. It was clean, untainted. "Why?" she demanded after drinking deeply. Tomas's gaze drifted over the battlefield. "There's been enough death. I didn't join the military to execute prisoners or destroy refugee camps." He looked back at her. "Can you walk?" "I can fight," Nara replied automatically, the warrior's pride speaking before her rational mind could intervene. A ghost of a smile touched Tomas's lips. "I don't doubt it. But right now we need to move. Patrol drones will sweep this sector soon." Nara struggled to her feet, wincing as her injuries protested. "I am Velan. You are human. There is no we. There's if we both want to survive," Tomas replied evenly. "You're injured, exhausted, and in enemy territory. I know the patrol patterns and a place where we can shelter until nightfall." Nara regarded him with suspicion. Every instinct honed through years of combat and imperial training screamed that this was a trap. Humans were cunning. Perhaps this one meant to lead her to a slower, more painful death or to interrogation. And yet, he had cut her bonds when he could have ended her life with the same blade. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, but she was already calculating her options. Even at full strength, escaping alone through an active human military zone would be nearly impossible. "You shouldn't," Tomas answered honestly. "But right now, I'm your best chance and you're mine." He held out his hand, a gesture Nara recognized from her studies of human customs as an offer of assistance or alliance. She ignored it, steadying herself independently, but gave a curt nod. Until nightfall, she conceded. As they began moving away from the open battlefield toward the shadows of a partially collapsed structure, Nara kept Tomas in her peripheral vision. Trust was a luxury she could not afford. Not with a human, not when her own people had branded her a traitor. Yet something in a way he had looked at her, not as an enemy alien or a military target, but as a wounded being deserving of basic decency, had sparked a feeling she couldn't name. It was unfamiliar, unsettling. And in the wasteland of war, where survival had been her only goal for so long, unsettling was dangerous. The journey through the ruins was slow and treacherous. Tomas led the way, occasionally raising his hand in a signal to stop while he listened for patrol drones or checked for safe passage through unstable debris. Nara followed, constantly scanning their surroundings, her hand never far from the ceremonial dagger still secured at her hip, the only weapon her captors had overlooked. "Stay low," Tomas whispered as they approached what had once been a perimeter wall. Beyond it lay a stretch of open ground before the blackened skeleton of a forest began, a place the humans had named the Ashlands after their scorched earth campaign. "The Ashlands are radioactive," Nara said quietly. "The atmosphere processors were targeted in the first wave." Tomas nodded. "Not lethal levels with short exposure. We need to reach the old bunker complex on the other side." He pointed to a distant ridge barely visible through the haze. Command abandoned it months ago when the front line shifted. They waited for a patrol of hovering drones to pass overhead, their searching beams sweeping the ground in methodical patterns. When the machines disappeared beyond the ruins, Tomas gestured forward. "Now, stay in my footsteps. There are still active mines." They crossed the exposed ground in tense silence, every step deliberate. Halfway across, Tomas paused and looked back at Nara, noting how she pressed her arm against her damaged side. "Why do they capture you instead of killing you on sight?" he asked. "Standard protocol for my unit was shoot to kill for any villain combatants." Nara's lips thinned. "I was Royal Guard. High value for interrogation. And now you're a deserter," Tomas concluded. "Like me, I am not a deserter," Nara hissed, her pride flaring. "I am." She stopped herself. What was she now? Not Imperial Guard. Not loyal subject. I refused an order that violated the ancient codes of my people. The Emperor himself ordered the execution of human prisoners, civilians included. Children. Understanding dawned in Tomas's eyes. "So you chose honor over obedience." "I chose what was right," Nara corrected him. "Though it cost me everything." Tomas was quiet for a moment, then said, 3 weeks ago, my squad was ordered to destroy a refugee settlement. Mixed population. Humans and Velans who'd been living together since before the war. Commander said it was harboring insurgents. His voice grew flat. There were no insurgents. Just families. I couldn't pull the trigger. A shared silence fell between them. Not comfortable, but somehow less hostile than before. They were still enemies by birth and training. But in this moment, they recognized something in each other, a line they had both refused to cross, even when ordered by those they had sworn to obey. They resumed their careful trek across the minefield, reaching the edge of the Ashlands as the acrid wind began to pick up, carrying stinging particles that reduced visibility to mere meters ahead. Tomas pulled a filtered mask from his pack and offered it to Nara. "I have enhanced respiratory filtration," she declined, pointing to her throat where a barely visible seam in her blue skin indicated an implant. "Standard for Royal Guard." Tomas nodded and donned the mask himself. "The bunker's about 2 kilometers in. Stay close. It's easy to get disoriented in the ash storms." They pressed forward into the Ashlands, the ground beneath their feet gradually changing from debris-strewn dirt to fine gray powder that swirled around their ankles with each step. The wind moaned through the skeletal trees, once mighty trunks reduced to charcoal pillars that occasionally cracked and fell, sending up plumes of ash like funeral pyres. The radiation detector on Tomas's wristband emitted occasional soft beeps, but the levels remained within tolerable limits. More concerning was Nara's increasingly labored breathing. Despite her enhanced filtration, the toxic atmosphere was taking its toll on her already weakened body. "There," Tomas finally said, pointing to a low concrete structure half buried in ash. "Service entrance to Bunker 17. They approached the heavy metal door cautiously. Tomas retrieved a small device from his pocket and placed it against the electronic lock. After a moment, the door's mechanisms groaned to life, and it slid open with a reluctant screech. "Military override," he explained at Nara's questioning look. "Still works on abandoned facilities." The interior was dark and stale, but mercifully free of the poisonous air outside. Tomas secured the door behind them and activated a small light source, illuminating a dusty corridor that led deeper into the earth. "We should be safe here for a few hours," he said, removing his mask. "These walls are thick enough to block standard scanners." Nara leaned against the wall, her stoic facade finally cracking as exhaustion overtook her. She slid down to a sitting position, her breathing shallow and pained. Tomas knelt beside her. "Let me see your wounds." "They will heal," she said dismissively. "Velan regeneration is superior to human." "Not with radiation exposure," Tomas countered. "And I'm guessing you've been without medical attention for at least a day." After a moment's hesitation, Nara nodded her consent. Tomas carefully examined the wound in her side, where energy weapons had burned through her armor and into the flesh beneath. The injury was serious. The edges of the wound had begun to take on the telltale discoloration of radiation poisoning, inhibiting her natural healing. From his pack, Tomas produced a compact medical kit and began cleaning the wound. Nara watched him curiously. "You were prepared to desert," she observed. "The supplies, the override codes." Tomas didn't look up from his work. "I've been planning my exit for weeks. Ever since the refugee camp." He applied a healing compound to her injury, his touch surprisingly gentle for a soldier. "I just needed the right moment." "And finding an enemy combatant to rescue was part of your plan?" Her tone was skeptical, though the edge had softened. "Finding someone who might understand why I left. That was unexpected." He finished bandaging her wound and sat back. "Rest. I'll keep watch." Nara wanted to protest that she needed no such consideration, but her body betrayed her as her eyelids grew heavy. The last thing she saw before succumbing to exhaustion was Tomas settling into position by the door, weapon ready but pointed away from her, a small gesture of trust that seemed impossible just hours ago. She awoke with a start, instinctively reaching for her dagger. Tomas was beside her instantly, a hand on her arm. "Easy," he whispered. "We've got company upstairs." Now fully alert, Nara could hear it too. The mechanical whir of drone engines and the rhythmic thumping of armored boots on the ground above them. She looked questioningly at Tomas. "Standard sweep pattern," he explained quietly. "They're being thorough." A loud crash echoed from above as something heavy was moved or toppled. Both of them tensed, weapons ready. "If they have deep scanners," Nara began. "They don't," Tomas interrupted. "Not standard issue for patrol units. But they might pick up our heat signatures if they get close enough to the ventilation shafts." They waited in tense silence. Nara noticed that her wound felt better. The human's medical compound had been effective. She flexed her fingers, preparing for combat, if necessary. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes, the sounds above began to recede. Just as they both started to relax, a new sound cut through the silence, a high-pitched beep from a scanner. "They found something," Tomas whispered. "We need to move deeper." They gathered their meager supplies and proceeded down the corridor, away from the entrance. The bunker expanded into a series of rooms, once offices or barracks, now stripped of anything useful. Tomas led them toward what appeared to be a communications center, its consoles dark and silent. "If any of these systems still have power," he said, examining the equipment, "we might be able to monitor their communications." Nara moved to a console and pressed a sequence of buttons. To their surprise, the screen flickered to life, running on emergency backup power. Imperial encryption training included human military systems, she explained at Tomas's raised eyebrow. She typed rapidly, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. "There, we should be able to—" She stopped abruptly as a voice crackled through the speakers. "All units, priority alert. Velan prisoner escape confirmed. Subject is Nara, former Royal Guard. Capture alive. Repeat, capture alive. She has critical value. Target is believed to be accompanied by deserter Thomas Reynolds. Lethal force authorized for accompanying personnel." Tomas's face hardened. "Well, that settles it. I'm officially a dead man walking." Nara looked at him, a new understanding forming. "You knew this would happen when you freed me. Yet you did it anyway." "I knew there'd be consequences," he acknowledged. "But I'm already a deserter. This just adds another charge to the list. Because of me, they will hunt you more aggressively," Nara said, an unfamiliar sensation of guilt washing over her. "You should go, separate from me. You might still—" "No," Tomas cut her off. "Splitting up won't help either of us now. They want you alive for some reason, and they want me dead. Our best chance is together." Nara wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. Still, something troubled her. "Critical value." She repeated the broadcast's words. Why would they? Her eyes widened with sudden realization. "The core." "What core?" Tomas asked sharply. Nara hesitated. Centuries of training to protect Imperial secrets warring with her current reality. But this human had saved her life, had bound her wounds, had become a target because of her. If they were to survive together, there needed to be truth between them. "Before I refused the Emperor's order, I was assigned to escort a member of the royal house off-planet," she explained. "They carried a data core containing defense intelligence. When I was branded a traitor, I acquired the core." "You stole it," Tomas translated. "I protected it," Nara corrected. "The information it contains could end this war, or extend it indefinitely if used improperly. I intended to use it to negotiate peace once I reached neutral territory." Tomas absorbed this information, his expression unreadable. "So you're not just a deserter, you're a high-value intelligence asset carrying state secrets." "Yes. And both sides want what you have." "Yes." Tomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Nara had come to recognize as his way of processing difficult information. "Well, that complicates things." He turned back to the console. "Can you access patrol routes? We need to find a way out of this sector." Nara nodded and returned to the terminal. As she worked, they heard a distant boom that reverberated through the bunker structure. "They're breaching the main entrance," Tomas said grimly. "How much time do you need?" 2 minutes, Nara replied, fingers flying over the interface. "There's an automated transport network that runs beneath the ashlands. If it's still operational, yes, there." She pointed to a flashing point on the screen. "Access tunnel, half a kilometer east." Another explosion, closer this time. "Time to go," Tomas said, checking his weapon. "Is there another way out of this room?" Nara pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor. "Utility tunnels. They'll lead us toward the transport access." They pried open the hatch and descended into a narrow passage just as the sounds of approaching troops echoed down the corridor. Tomas pulled the hatch closed behind them, and they crawled through the confined space, guided only by the light from Tomas's small portable lamp. After several minutes of uncomfortable progress, they emerged into a wider service tunnel. Standing upright for the first time since their escape, they took a moment to orient themselves. "It should be this way," Tomas said, pointing down the tunnel. They moved as quickly as their injuries allowed, the distant sounds of pursuit spurring them on. The service tunnel eventually opened into a larger chamber that had once housed automated maintenance systems for the bunker complex. Now it stood silent, machines covered in dust and grime. "There," Nara pointed to a heavy door on the far side. "That should lead to the transport tunnel." As they crossed the chamber, a new sound stopped them in their tracks, the distinctive whine of military-grade hovering drones entering the space behind them. Tomas spun around, raising his weapon. "Run for the door," he ordered Nara. "I'll cover you." Instead of obeying, Nara drew her ceremonial dagger and stepped to his side. "We fight together." 3 combat drones emerged from the tunnel entrance, their weapons systems activating with an ominous hum. Behind them came 4 soldiers in the distinctive armor of special forces, elite human fighters trained specifically for high-value target acquisition. "Surrender the villain," the lead soldier called out. "Reynolds, you're already condemned. Make it easy on yourself." Tomas's only response was to fire the first shot, hitting one of the drones and sending it spiraling into a wall. The chamber erupted into chaos as energy weapons discharged from both sides, filling the air with deadly beams of concentrated light. Nara moved with the fluid grace that had made the Velan Royal Guard legendary, evading fire and closing the distance to the nearest drone. With a leap that defied her injuries, she landed atop the machine and plunged her dagger into its central processing unit. As it crashed to the ground, she rolled clear, snatching up its fallen weapon. Now armed with more than her dagger, she joined Tomas in laying down covering fire. They worked in unexpected harmony, he providing strategic shots that forced the soldiers into cover, she eliminating their technological advantages one by one. But they were outnumbered and increasingly cornered. A shot grazed Tomas's leg, causing him to stumble. In that moment of vulnerability, 2 of the soldiers rushed forward. Nara reacted without hesitation, throwing herself between Tomas and the attackers. She took down one with a precisely aimed shot, but the second reached her, knocking the weapon from her hand. They grappled in close combat, the human's enhanced armor giving him an edge over Nara's weakened state. Tomas, seeing her in danger, made a desperate move. He triggered an explosive charge from his pack, one he'd been saving as a last resort, and threw it toward a cluster of decommissioned machinery near the attacking soldiers. "Down!" he shouted to Nara. The explosion rocked the chamber, sending debris flying in all directions. Taking advantage of the confusion, Nara broke free from her attacker and rejoined Tomas. Together, they stumbled toward the transport tunnel door. Tomas's override codes again proved useful, the heavy door sliding open just enough for them to squeeze through before closing behind them. On the other side, they found themselves on a narrow platform beside an automated rail system that stretched into darkness in both directions. "Can you still walk?" Nara asked, noticing Tomas's worsening limp. "Well enough," he grimaced, "but they'll be through that door in minutes." Nara scanned the platform and spotted a small transport car. "There, if I can activate it." A thunderous banging on the door behind them emphasized their dwindling time. Nara worked quickly, accessing the transport's controls while Tomas kept watch on the door, which was beginning to glow red at the edges as the soldiers attempted to cut through. With a surge of power that surprised them both, the transport car systems came online. "In," Nara commanded, helping Tomas aboard before jumping in herself. The car lurched forward just as the door finally gave way, soldiers pouring onto the platform with weapons raised. Their shots chased the accelerating transport, but soon fell behind as Nara and Tomas disappeared into the tunnel's darkness. Relative safety finally allowed them to assess their injuries. Tomas's leg wound was painful, but not life-threatening. Nara had sustained additional cuts and burns, but nothing her enhanced physiology couldn't handle given time. They sat across from each other in the dimly lit transport car, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails the only sound for several minutes. "Thank you," Tomas finally said, "for the combat assistance back there." Nara inclined her head slightly. "We are, as you said, better together than apart." They were special forces, Tomas noted. That's significant resources to allocate for a single deserter and a prisoner. "Not for a prisoner with the information I carry," Nara responded. She reached into a hidden compartment in what remained of her armor and extracted a small crystalline object that pulsed with an inner light. The core. Tomas stared at the object. "That's what they want? Seems small to cause so much trouble." "Size is irrelevant to its value," Nara said, carefully returning it to its hiding place. It contains the access codes and locations of the Velan Empire's primary weapons development facilities, including the Stellar Forge. Tomas's eyes widened. The Stellar Forge is real? I thought it was propaganda. It is very real, Nara confirmed grimly. A weapon capable of accelerating a star's natural life cycle, causing it to go supernova centuries before its time. The Emperor has threatened to use it against human-populated systems if your forces don't surrender. My God, Tomas breathed. That would kill billions. Yes, which is why I could not allow this information to remain in the hands of those who would use it. Nara's expression grew distant. My people were once known as philosophers and artists throughout the galaxy. Now we are feared as conquerors and murderers. This war has corrupted everything I once held sacred. The transport continued its journey through the darkness, carrying them further from their pursuers, but toward an uncertain destination. Both were lost in thought, processing the magnitude of what they now carried. Not just their own lives, but potentially the fate of billions. Where does this transport line end? Tomas eventually asked. According to the terminal data, it connects to an old communications relay station, Nara replied. From there, we might be able to access wider broadcast channels. Broadcast? You mean you want to go public with this information? Nara nodded solemnly. The core contains proof of corruption on both sides. Human generals and Velan royalty prolonging the war for power and profit. If the people of both worlds knew the truth, it would cause chaos, Tomas warned. Uprisings, possibly civil wars within each faction. Perhaps, Nara acknowledged. But is that worse than the alternative? Total war? Stellar. Genocide? Tomas couldn't argue with her logic. The relay station will be guarded. Maybe not heavily if it's in a remote location, but we'll have to fight our way in. Or find another approach, Nara suggested. You know human security protocols better than I do. And you know how to bypass them, Tomas added with a hint of respect in his voice. For the first time since they'd met on the battlefield, Nara's lips curved into something resembling a smile. We make a capable team, human. Tomas, he corrected her gently. Tomas, she repeated, the name strange but not unpleasant on her tongue. The transport began to slow, signaling their approach to a station. They readied themselves, checking weapons and preparing for whatever awaited them. As the car came to a stop, they found themselves at an abandoned platform similar to the one they'd left behind, but with signs of more recent use. Footprints in the dust, maintenance tools left against a wall. Someone's been here, Tomas whispered as they cautiously exited the transport. They followed a passage that led upward, emerging finally into a vast chamber housing communications equipment. Unlike the bunker, this facility hummed with active power, its systems maintained for ongoing use. The relay station, Nara confirmed, moving toward the central console. If I can access the primary broadcast array. Stop, Tomas suddenly hissed, pulling her behind a large server bank. Look! Through the gaps in the equipment, they could see figures moving on a walkway above, human soldiers in the same special forces armor they'd encountered in the bunker. They beat us here, Tomas said in disbelief. Ow! They didn't, came a cold voice from behind them. We were already here. They spun to find themselves facing Commander Morrow, a tall, imposing man whose decorated armor marked him as a high-ranking officer. Behind him stood 4 more soldiers, weapons trained on Nara and Tomas. Reynolds, Morrow acknowledged with disdain. Always knew you were weak. But treason? That's a new low even for you. The only traitor here is you, Morrow, Tomas shot back. I heard about your deals with the Velan separatists. Weapon shipments that mysteriously end up in enemy hands, refugee camps that get accidentally targeted when they know too much. Morrow's face remained impassive. War requires difficult decisions. Something you never understood. His gaze shifted to Nara. And you, the Emperor's prize guard dog, turned thief. Where's the core? Nara straightened to her full height, her warrior's pride evident despite her battered condition. I will die before I give it to you. That can be arranged, Morrow replied coldly. But not before we extract what we need. He gestured to his men. Take them. What happened next was a blur of motion. Nara, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she still possessed, launched herself at the nearest soldier. Tomas simultaneously dropped and rolled, coming up with his weapon firing. The confined space worked to their advantage, limiting the soldier's ability to use their superior numbers effectively. Nara disarmed one and used his own weapon against his comrades, while Tomas provided covering fire that kept Moro pinned behind a console. But their advantage was temporary. An alarm blared through the facility, and the sound of reinforcements echoed from the corridors. The broadcast array. Nara shouted to Tomas above the chaos. "We must reach it." Understanding her intent, Tomas created a diversion by overloading a power relay, causing a cascade of electrical failures that plunged sections of the chamber into darkness. In the confusion, they fought their way toward the central platform where the main broadcast controls were located. Nara reached the console first, quickly inserting the core into an adapter port. Her fingers flew over the interface, bypassing security measures and preparing the system for a galaxy-wide transmission. "Cover me," she called to Tomas. "I need 2 minutes to configure the broadcast." Tomas positioned himself at the top of the platform steps, using the elevated position to hold off the advancing soldiers. But he was running out of ammunition, and Moro's forces were regrouping. "Whatever you're doing, make it fast," he urged. Nara worked feverishly, uploading the core's contents and setting the transmission parameters. The console flashed warnings about unauthorized access, but she overrode them with Imperial command codes that were still, surprisingly, valid. Just as she completed the final sequence, a shot from below struck her shoulder, spinning her away from the console. Tomas turned to help her, but in that moment of distraction, Commander Moro himself reached the platform, weapon raised. "Enough," he snarled. "This ends now." "You're right," Nara said through gritted teeth, clutching her wounded shoulder. "It does end now." With her uninjured arm, she slammed her palm onto the activation panel. Immediately, every screen in the facility lit up with the core's contents, streaming data, classified documents, and recorded meetings between high-ranking officials from both sides, conspiring to prolong the war for their own gain. Moro lunged for the console, but Tomas intercepted him. The two men grappled at the edge of the platform, their struggle fierce and desperate. Nara attempted to reach them, but her injury slowed her movements. "Tomas!" she cried out as Moro gained the upper hand, forcing Tomas to his knees. What happened next will be burned into Nara's memory forever. Rather than surrender, Tomas pulled Moro closer and triggered a small explosive charge, his final one, that he'd concealed in his hand. The blast was contained, but powerful enough to send both men over the edge of the platform. Nara rushed to the railing, looking down in horror. Both men lay on the floor below, unmoving. Around them, the remaining soldiers had stopped fighting, transfixed by the damning evidence now broadcasting across all channels. Ignoring her own pain, Nara descended to where Tomas had fallen. He was alive but badly injured, blood pooling beneath him. Moro lay nearby, either unconscious or dead. Nara didn't care which. "Foolish human," she murmured, cradling Tomas's head. "Why such recklessness?" "Had to finish what we started," he managed to say, his voice weak but determined. "Is it done?" "The broadcast?" "Yes," Nara confirmed, glancing at the nearest screen where Imperial records continued to stream. "The truth is out. Both sides will know they've been deceived." A faint smile touched Tomas's lips. "Good." The soldiers around them were in disarray, some fleeing, others standing in shock as their communications devices overflowed with incoming messages. The revelation was spreading faster than anyone could contain it. "We need to get you medical attention," Nara said urgently, noting Tomas's worsening condition. "Probably a good idea," he agreed, his eyes beginning to flutter. Before she could respond, new figures entered the chamber, but not reinforcements as she had feared. These were medical personnel, followed by what appeared to be resistance fighters, a mixed group of humans and Velans working together. "Over here," Nara called out, surprised at the sight of her people alongside humans. "He needs help." The medics rushed forward, gently moving Nara aside to attend to Tomas. As they worked to stabilize him, a Velan resistance leader approached Nara. "You're the one who sent the broadcast," he said, not a question, but statement. "We've been monitoring this station for weeks, waiting for an opportunity to strike. When your signal went out, we moved in." "You work with humans?" Nara asked, still processing this unexpected development. "For over a year now," the resistance leader confirmed. "There are many on both sides who suspected what you've just proven, that the war was being manipulated. Your broadcast has ignited something significant." Reports were already coming in through the Resistance's communications. Demonstrations erupting in human territories, civil unrest in Velan strongholds, military units refusing orders, calls for investigations and ceasefires. The carefully maintained propaganda that had fueled a decade of hatred was crumbling hour by hour. Tomas was stabilized enough to be moved. As the medics prepared to transport him, his eyes found Nara's. "Come with us," the resistance leader urged her. "You'll both be safer at our base until the situation stabilizes." Nara nodded, her gaze never leaving Tomas as they were escorted from the facility. Outside, she was surprised to see dawn breaking over the ashlands, the toxic haze tinged with gold as sunlight penetrated for the first time in years. The resistance base turned out to be an underground complex several kilometers from the relay station. Tomas was immediately taken to a medical bay, surprisingly well-equipped for a guerrilla operation. Hours passed as Nara waited outside the treatment area. Her own wounds tended to by a Velan medic who worked alongside human doctors with practiced ease. The sight of such cooperation still unsettled her, defying everything she had been taught during her years in the Royal Guard. "He'll live," a human doctor finally announced, emerging from Tomas's room. "But recovery will take time." Relief washed over Nara, an emotion she hadn't expected to feel so strongly for a human. "May I see him?" The doctor nodded and stepped aside. Tomas lay on a medical bed, various monitors tracking his vital signs. His wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, and color was slowly returning to his face. His eyes opened as Nara approached. "I thought Velans didn't worry about humans," he said, his voice weak, but the familiar spark still present in his gaze. "We don't," Nara replied, sitting carefully beside his bed. "But I might make an exception for the human. Who helped expose a galactic conspiracy?" A tired smile crossed Tomas's face. "How bad is it out there?" "Chaotic," Nara admitted, "but perhaps necessarily so. The resistance leaders say military commands on both sides are fragmenting. Some units have declared ceasefires, others are in open conflict with their own leadership. And Moro, alive but in custody. The resistance plans to bring him before a joint tribunal. Something unprecedented." Tomas absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. "It's not peace." "No," Nara agreed, "but it's a chance for something other than endless war." She paused, then added more softly, "Your recklessness nearly got you killed." "Worth it," Tomas said simply. "Some things are." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the resistance leaders, a human woman named Eliza and a male Velan called Krell. Both carried themselves with the bearing of veteran fighters, but lacked the rigid formality of official military. "Our intelligence networks are reporting remarkable developments," Eliza told them. "The broadcast has reached every corner of both territories. Citizens are demanding answers. Troops are refusing orders, and several high-ranking officials on both sides have already been arrested or have fled." "What happens now?" Tomas asked. Krell, the Velan, stepped forward. "That depends partly on you too. You've become symbols. A human soldier and a Velan royal guard who chose to fight together rather than against each other. Your testimony could be powerful in the days ahead." Nara frowned. "I have no interest in becoming a political tool." "Not a tool," Eliza clarified. "A voice. A witness to corruption that cost billions of lives. But the choice is yours. We can arrange safe passage to neutral territory once Tomas is well enough to travel." After the leaders departed, Nara and Tomas sat in silence for several minutes. "What will you do?" Tomas finally asked. Return to Veland's space? Nara shook her head. There is nothing for me there. Those I serve betrayed everything our civilization once stood for. She looked at her hands, a warrior's hands, trained to kill, but which had ultimately helped reveal truth instead. And you? Will you seek amnesty among your people? I'm not sure I have a people anymore, Tomas replied. But I know I want to help ensure this revelation leads to something better, not just more chaos. 2 weeks passed, with Tomas growing stronger each day. Nara spent much of her time monitoring communications and intelligence reports, watching as the political landscape of both civilizations underwent seismic shifts. Resistance cells emerged from hiding across dozens of worlds, revealing networks that had been building for years. Peace demonstrations spread through major population centers, sometimes met with violence from those who had profited from the conflict, but increasingly supported by military units who laid down their arms. Through it all, Nara found herself changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The rigid imperial worldview that had once been the foundation of her identity continued to crumble, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of both Veland and human societies. On the day Tomas was finally cleared to leave the medical bay, they walked together through the underground complex, his steps still careful but steadier. The resistance leadership has asked us to address a joint council, he told her. Representatives from both sides who want to negotiate a formal end to hostilities. Politicians, Nara said with distaste. They will try to preserve their power even now. Probably, Tomas agreed, which is why they need to hear from people like us. People who've seen the truth firsthand. Nara considered this. The thought of standing before officials from both civilizations was uncomfortable. Yet there was wisdom in Tomas's suggestion. If their experience could help prevent further bloodshed. Very well, she finally said. But I will speak truth, regardless of who it offends. I'd expect nothing less, Tomas replied with a smile. The Joint Council convened 3 days later in a neutral location, a space station that had once served as a diplomatic hub before the war. Nara and Tomas arrived escorted by resistance members, both still bearing visible signs of their ordeal, but standing tall as they entered the chamber where representatives from both civilizations waited. The atmosphere was tense, centuries of hatred and a decade of open warfare not easily set aside. Human diplomats sat rigidly across from Veland representatives, neither side fully trusting the presence of the other. Nara felt all eyes upon them as they took their positions at the center of the assembly. She had abandoned her damaged Royal Guard armor, instead wearing a simple civilian garment that bore no insignia of rank or allegiance. Beside her, Tomas wore similar neutral clothing, his military identity likewise set. Aside, we have reviewed the evidence from the data core, began the senior human representative, a stern-faced woman whose formal attire couldn't quite conceal her military bearing. If verified, it suggests criminal conduct by elements within both our governments. The recordings are authentic, declared a Veland official. We have confirmed the identities of those involved, including 3 members of the imperial family. Murmurs spread through the assembly at this admission. What we require now, continued the human representative, is testimony from those who brought this information forward. Specifically, we need to understand your motivations and what you witnessed firsthand. Tomas glanced at Nara, then stepped forward. My motivation was simple. I joined the military to protect people, not to massacre them. When I was ordered to fire on a refugee camp, I saw what we had become, not defenders but executioners. Every value I thought I was fighting for had been corrupted. His words hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence from some and nods of understanding from others. Then Nara spoke, her clear voice carrying throughout the chamber. I was born into service of the Imperial Guard. For centuries, we were the embodiment of Veland honor, protectors, not conquerors. When I was commanded to execute unarmed prisoners, I faced the same realization as this human. She gestured to Tomas. Our leaders had betrayed our most sacred principles in pursuit of power. Over the hours that followed, they recounted their journey, From that first moment on the battlefield when Tomas chose mercy over execution, through their desperate flight across the ashlands, to the final confrontation at the relay station. They spoke of discovering their shared values despite a lifetime of conditioning to view each other as enemies, and of the corruption they had uncovered that had artificially prolonged a war neither population truly wanted. As they concluded their testimony, an elderly Velan counselor rose to his feet. What you have described is disturbing but enlightening. If a royal guard and a human soldier can find common cause, perhaps there is hope for our civilizations. Hope requires more than words, Nara responded firmly. It requires action. Those responsible for prolonging this war, on both sides, must be held accountable. And what would you have us do? Asked a human delegate skeptically. Generations of hatred cannot be undone in a day. No, Tomas agreed, but they can begin to be undone with truth. The people deserve to know what this war has really been about. Not defense, not security, but profit and power for the few at the cost of millions of lives. The deliberations continued for days, with Nara and Tomas serving as witnesses and occasionally as voices of conscience when the discussions turned toward political convenience rather than justice. They watched as provisional agreements were formed, ceasefires extended, prisoner exchanges arranged, investigations into war crimes launched. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. When the council finally adjourned, Nara and Tomas stood on an observation deck overlooking the vast starfield beyond the station, a rare moment of quiet amid the diplomatic frenzy. They've offered me a position, Tomas said, as an advisor to the human delegation during the transition. Will you accept? Nara asked. I'm considering it. He turned to face her. They've made you a similar offer, representative of Velan dissidents in the new Joint Governance Committee. Nara's gaze remained fixed on the stars. I have not decided. Whatever you choose, Tomas said quietly, know that what you did changed everything. Not just for our civilizations, but for me. He hesitated, then added, when I found you on that battlefield, I was lost, a deserter with no purpose beyond escape. You gave me something to fight for again. Nara finally turned to him, studying the human face that had become so familiar over their weeks together. And you showed me that honor can exist even in those I was trained to see only as enemies. Her voice softened. Perhaps that is the most valuable lesson of all. The future remained uncertain. The path to true peace would be long and fraught with obstacles. Centuries of mistrust and a decade of open warfare had left wounds that would not easily heal. But as they stood together, a Velan warrior and a human soldier who had both chosen conscience over duty, they represented something new. The possibility that understanding could triumph over hatred, that compassion could be found even in the darkness of war. 3 months later, a monument was unveiled on a small, once contested world that had been designated as neutral territory, a meeting place for ongoing peace negotiations. The statue depicted 2 figures standing back to back, one human, one Velan, both looking outward as if standing guard not against each other, but for each other. The inscription at its base read simply, "She braced for death at human hands." But what he did instead changed her forever. Nara stood before the monument, her expression unreadable to most of the assembled dignitaries. But Tomas, standing nearby, recognized the subtle indicators of emotion that he had come to understand during their time together. The slight tension around her eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in her posture. "Ridiculous," she murmured when he approached. "We did what was necessary, nothing more." Maybe, Tomas conceded, but symbols matter, especially now. In the months since their testimony, progress had been uneven but real. The revelation of the conspiracy had sparked revolutions in some sectors, peaceful transitions in others. War criminals were being brought to justice, though too many had escaped. Refugee camps were being disbanded as displaced populations began the long process of rebuilding or finding new homes. And throughout it all, Nara and Tomas had continued to work, sometimes together, sometimes apart, but always toward the same goal, a lasting peace based on truth rather than propaganda. Will you be returning to the negotiations on Centauri Prime? Nara asked as they walked away from the ceremony. Not immediately, Tomas replied. I've been asked to help establish a joint security force in the border regions. Humans and Velans working together to prevent flare-ups and protect civilians from the remaining extremists. A worthy endeavor, Nara nodded approvingly. They asked for you specifically, Tomas added. Your skills as a former royal guard would be invaluable. Nara stopped walking, her expression thoughtful. I have spent my life as a warrior, Tomas. I'm not certain I know how to be anything else. You don't need to be something else, he said gently. Just use those skills for a different purpose. Protecting instead of conquering. Building instead of destroying. She considered his words carefully, then reached a decision. Very well. I will join this security force, temporarily, to see if such a thing can truly function. Tomas smiled, knowing this was as close to enthusiasm as Nara ever expressed. We leave in 3 days. As they continued walking through the memorial gardens that surrounded the new monument, they passed other visitors, humans and Velans moving cautiously around each other. The reflexive distrust of a lifetime, still evident, but gradually giving way to curiosity and tentative interaction. Do you think it will last? Nara asked quietly, watching a human child hesitantly approach a Velan elder who offered a traditional greeting in return. This peace we've helped create. I don't know, Tomas answered honestly. But for the first time in my life, I believe it's possible. And that's something worth fighting for. Nara nodded, her gaze returning to the monument behind them. The physical embodiment of a moment that had changed not just her life, but potentially the course of 2 civilizations. A moment when a human soldier had offered water instead of execution to an enemy combatant. Yes, she agreed, the faintest smile touching her lips. Some things are worth fighting for. Together, they walked toward the shuttle bay, their path forward uncertain but shared. Former enemies transformed by compassion, by choice, and by the recognition that even across the divide of species and ideology, honor and mercy could form a bridge. Behind them, the monument stood as a silent witness to the truth they had discovered, that in the darkest moments of war, a single act of kindness could ignite a light that even the most entrenched hatred could not extinguish.